Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Kashmir Exists podcast. My name is Teyshi, and today we've got a new guest. How exciting! I've got Irish Warrior with me here. Welcome, Irish.
Hi, how are things? Thank you for having me.
Absolutely our pleasure. It's so nice to have you on this podcast. Some of you may already know Irish Warrior from TikTok. He's a massive advocate and a great person for us to feature on the podcast today. Now, Irish, if I could go straight in with it, the Irish are very famously pro-freedom movement, very big supporters of Palestine and its freedom movement. I know that with Kashmir, you also support that a lot, but I wanted to kind of know why that is. So, first of all, let me start with this. Why is it that a lot of Irish people are so supportive of freedom movements?
Well, I think everyone's 101 reasons about our history being colonized and all the rest, but basically, for the simple fact, it's the right thing to do, standing up against oppression. British colonized us for 800 years. What you see in Palestine in these days is fairly similar to what happened to us. Like even when we got our independence in 1920, the Black and Tans Army was actually sent over to Palestine to colonize Palestine, and they basically done the same thing before they handed over to Israel. So there's a lot of similarities in our history, and with the oppression that every family has gone through, all their ancestors, they kind of still remember it through the what happened in 1845 with the genocide that they caused in this country, where we lost millions of people through starvation because a, pota- a potato famine happened in our country, but we were only allowed to eat the rotten potatoes. We were only allowed one potato a day, and if we were seen or caught with more than one potato, we were actually kicked out of Ireland. At that stage, there was plenty enough food in Ireland, but the British exported all the food out to their own country. I suppose with us rebelling the whole time, we just beat them through guerrilla warfare and gained our independence in 1920, as
Yeah.
we never backed down.
That's
Uh,
amazing, amazing summary. So you did mention some really interesting things there. Why were the British in Ireland in the first place? Do you know? Why were they even there?
they came to because of our wood.
Yeah.
That's how it all started off. They came over for wood and then just started colonizing us.
And when was that approximately? Like, how many years would you say that Britain kind of, occupied Ireland?
Well, it was just under 900 years. We were colonized for 800 years.
Wow,
And
I didn't even realize it was so long. That's outrageous.
yeah, well, there was many uprisings, but none of them kind of really took off. But
Mm.
in 1916, a big uprising happened, and we just beat them through guerrilla warfare, just simply picking them off one by one, and they
Mhm.
couldn't do anything to stop it.
Yeah, obviously, I mentioned before that the Irish people generally are staunch supporters of freedom movement, and it's easy with your sort of explanation there to see why that is. I mean, 800 to like 900 almost years, that is quite unthinkable. I know that when we think of Palestine, it's 1948, so it's like over 76 years now. With Kashmir, it's 1947 that we've been occupied by India. For us, it's over 77 years. So we definitely, I mean, I have to say for Kashmir Valley, we've had a lot of occupiers for hundreds of years, but they tended to have been different people, different rulers, different people trying to take over us, as in they would purchase the land of Kashmir and then they might sell it on to someone else, so we might get another ruler. We've also had different dynasties that passed through. But I think with India, it's the first formal occupation of us by another country that we've ever had. I don't even think that we felt British occupation in that way, because the British really didn't have much to do with Kashmir, although they technically were occupying us. They kind of sold us off to, I think his name was Gulab Singh, and he was one of the rulers of the Dog dynasty there as well. And that's where it all started for us. So definitely you have a lot of experience. But it's interesting that you mentioned, that they came for the wood. Was that presumably to buy wood or take the wood? What exactly were they doing there?
I don't know for 100%.
Hmm.
That's the reason they actually came, but then they kind of just stayed, and
Yeah,
just kind of things started escalating slowly but surely. But then
yeah,
Britain just tried colonizing a lot of countries. Like at that
yeah.
stage,
Hmm.
we
You're
were the
right, though.
first
A
one.
a lot of it was they would just come in and for one reason, and they would end up just taking over. That did happen quite a lot with Britain as well. So obviously for Ireland, that seems to be exactly the same as well. I think what can people learn from the Irish and the fact that you were saying had several uprisings, sort of started it, may not have fully happened. It seems to be you're a very resilient people, and you mentioned guerrilla warfare there. So that's really the resistance part of it. What can people learn from the Irish struggle, do you think?
Well, like oppression breeds resistance at the end of the day. And once you're oppressed so much, you are going to resist. People should never give up. They should never forget their history. They should never forget their language. Britain actually sentenced us to death if we actually spoke Irish.
Wow.
Our national
That's
anthem, if we sang that in English, we would have been sentenced to death as well. That's the reason why it's mainly sang in Irish as a
Mm.
tradition. It's like our national anthem is a rebel song at the end of the day.
Yeah. And
Um,
it's funny that you say that, because, there's a big drive in Kashmir at the moment to reclaim the language and to really prioritize speaking Kashmir as much as possible. Because, as you know, language is identity. It is a form of resistance in itself as well. So, totally get where you're coming from. But it sounds to me like, from what you're saying, they didn't just come in and occupy and just let people at least live their lives. They wanted to dominate in every sphere. So that seems to be a tactic, especially of the British as well. Can you talk us through again in more detail? Because I think you were talking about various different ways of oppression. In what kind of ways did they oppress their people? Because obviously, nearly 900 years, a long time. What exactly did the British do to the Irish in those years?
Basically, we were only allowed to have one potato a day.
And was that
Um,
all the food that you could eat? Was there anything other? Were you allowed one potato, and was there anything else on the plate, or was that literally your only form
that,
of
that, that,
sustenance?
that's all we were basically allowed to eat that time. If if we were caught, we could have been sentenced to death or to exile to the likes of Australia.
And was there any oh gosh, that's wild. Was there any sort of reason for that? What was the reason for this rationing
There was no reason at all. It was just a way of them oppressing us more than
and
anything.
controlling? And you were
Uh,
saying that they would throw people out of Ireland. You mentioned they went to Australia. Was there any other countries? Was it, other countries like America or elsewhere?
It,
Or was it mainly Australia?
it was mainly Australia. If you listen to the Christy Moore song, I Wish I Was Back Home in Derry, it starts off in 1803, I set out for sea. It's basically
Hmm.
them being sent off in the ships that was known as a coffin ship, because
Oh
a lot of
wow.
people would actually die on those ships because there would be no
Yeah.
medication, everyone would be malnutritioned and all the rest.
So it was a treacherous journey, if you made it at all, really, as well. And so these people were exported, or what's the word? They were kicked out of the country, basically. And they were sent to Australia. Obviously, other people that went to Australia were some of the convicts in the UK as well. So was that around the same time? So were some of the Irish, were they seen as breaking the law, and that's why they were sending them to Australia?
Yeah, yeah, in a way, yeah, you could say that. But
Which is kind of crazy, just because what they wanted to eat food.
yeah, it's the simple basic things like as you see, like what's going on in Gaza with 2.4 million people starving there at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
You
Yeah.
know, they're not allowed to have their food and stuff either. But it's just
Yeah. And this was to essentially drive the people down, weaken them, take the fight out of the people, make them submissive. Would you agree with that?
yeah, like before the genocide that happened in our country, we were 10 million people, and
Mm-hmm.
now it went down to what was it, 6 to 6 million, and it's up to around 8 million now again.
That's wild. So let's talk about it then. So you've described there how the British came in on the pretext of something, and then it soon turned out to be clear that they had other ambitions in Ireland. They were taking your resources, they were taking your food. What did that look like?
Well, you know yourself, when everything's being exported and you're just being oppressed, like it's kind of like people will deal with it for a certain length of time. And
Mm,
then it was like the IRB was founded, which was the Irish Republican Brotherhood.
mm-hmm,
It was just before the IRA like it
mm-hmm.
came about, and
Yeah.
well, they started up the resistance and brought the British to their knees.
So there was armed resistance, guerrilla warfare, like you mentioned. This was in direct response to the Irish people suffering. I mean, obviously, the Irish went through a lot at the hands of the British. It can't be forgotten. Certainly not when you're talking about the best part of almost like 1,000 years. That's wild to me. And I think definitely we should do everything to keep that history alive. But it's also interesting to me that although your food is being rationed in some crazy way, which is clearly, in a way that would promote malnutrition, ill health, children wouldn't develop, things like that, growing children, etc. It's not enough sustenance for working people. The resistance in the end, that must have been even tougher then, because the resistance was coming from a people that were severely undernourished. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, they would have been they would be suffering from the lack of food and stuff like that. Like we weren't never allowed to hold our own land or anything like that. It was all it just builds up over time, and well,
Yeah.
as, as you can see, like throughout our history, like we never backed down from them. We
Hmm.
were just more of a thorn in their side more than anything.
Yeah.
They tried to releasing Scottish prisoners, which were known as the Black and Tans in Ireland, and well, when we rebelled against them, they just used to come along and unalive any person at all. Like they could, if they saw a kid on the side of the street, they just come and unalive their entire family and stuff like that.
Wow.
You know.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, what you describe, it just sounds quite hard to believe in some ways. Definitely some of the parallels there with Palestine, and certainly me being a Kashmiri, I can understand why you would feel so moved for freedom struggles. And when did this, it went on for a long time, but it was 1920 or 1921 that you managed to gain independence. Is that correct?
Yeah, 1921.
But
Uh,
Northern Ireland obviously still stays with the UK.
yeah, there was a peace treaty. Michael Collins went over to Britain and made a peace deal. He got back most of the land. Now, I'm a pro 32 man. I would like to see it back, but there's peace up there at the moment. Like so,
Yeah.
we can't complain about that, and hopefully it
Mm.
won't go back to the days of
Mm-hmm.
the 80s and 70s that was going on up there, because there was some horrific stuff that actually happened. Like I live on the opposite side of the country. I live down the West Cork part. But I
Hmm.
remember when I was a young lad, I must have been only around 5 or 6, going up visiting the cousins, and we came into a checkpoint, and like it was literally the army there with the guns and everything out, and I
Mm.
thought it was the coolest thing ever when I was so young. And it wasn't until a few years later I actually realized what actually happened. But
Yeah.
I I've always got that image in my head coming into that checkpoint. It's
Yeah.
kind of like I
Mm.
don't know what it is that stuck with me.
Hmm.
Since I was so
Hmm.
young. You know,
Yeah, no, no, I can totally understand that. And, interesting you talk about checkpoints because they're a feature of, in Gaza, you get them in the West Bank. So this is a reality for Palestinians. I know that since the late 80s, we started to have checkpoints in the valley, in Kashmir Valley. And it is strange for people that have never been to a checkpoint, how you've described it from your child's sort of vision there, but you get stopped, the vehicle gets stopped. There are certainly in Kashmir Valley, and I know this happens in Palestine, you're asked to come out of the vehicle. There are there's soldiers there that do have full on rifles. They're fully in battle sort of thing with their their weapons, etc. And it's weird because it immediately puts you into a thing of, you can be going about your business. And a checkpoint is a strange thing because you are just going about your business until you reach it. And then you have to go through this sort of, process, this military process where soldiers with weapons will kind of assess whether you're good to go or not. And that is a bit of a strange thing. So for people who don't really understand checkpoints, what more do you think you can tell them to help them understand like the gravity of how, I know you were young and you thought it was cool because there was like men with guns there, but as an adult, from an adult's brain, it is psychologically weird, isn't it, to be in a checkpoint?
yeah, like it was more the look on the parents' faces more than anything. That kind of really kind of hit home coming into it, because I say they didn't know what to expect themselves, and
Right.
you
So,
know,
you
uh,
drove up to the checkpoint, you get stopped, is that right?
yeah, and
And then do you know what they do then?
well, they got IDs off the parents. We had to get out of the car, like stand on the side of the road for 10 minutes while
Okay.
they look inside the boot and around the car. Um,
Mm.
they were checking underneath the car as well for
Wow.
something. They
Yeah.
had a mirror with a torch on it, kind of thing,
Mm-hmm.
and there was a couple of dogs there, but the dogs didn't come near the car or anything like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a
Yeah.
strange experience. It's something that you will remember at the same time.
Definitely. Definitely. It is strange as a civilian to suddenly come into that kind of situation because it's not like anything you've ever been through. And you are immediately put on slight alert. Certainly, maybe not as a child because you can't process everything that's going on. And do they still have checkpoints there?
Not that I know of, to be quite honest. It would
That's
be
good.
just normal checkpoints. Like, I like certain parts would be kind of heavy loyalist kind of area. Um, on the 12th of July every year, uh, they do marching with their bands and stuff, and then starts at nighttime. They do big, massive bumpers, like
Mm-hmm.
they'd get a load of pallets. They'd make them like 2 or 3 stories high buildings, and they would put on the Scottish, Irish, and Palestinian flag and burn them every year
Oh
on the
my
bumpers.
goodness.
So
That's wild.
yeah, but our look, if that's as bad as it gets,
Mm-hmm.
it's not too bad. Like, but yeah, it should stop. There should be some law brought in against
Mm-hmm.
it. Like at the end of the day, but
Yeah. Well, you never know. Hopefully, Ireland can kind of unite one time, and as long as there's peace, that's the most important thing, and as long as people aren't being oppressed. But for people who criticize, because let's think about it, we know that the IRA were designated a terrorist organization. We know that Hamas are. We know that before them, the previous, whether it was the PLO, whoever they were in Palestine, they were designated terrorist groups. We know that the likes of the Houthis are designated terrorist groups. We have our own kind of resistance in the valley, and they're designated. There are different ones, by the way, not just one. There are like several different movements of resistance, and they're designated terrorist group, which sort of tells people and it tells the world like these are the bad guys. These people are basically a danger. They going around literally terrorizing people and killing people. I can say killing. I'm not on TikTok. They're literally just these bad people that are just doing these terrible things to innocent people, causing that's what's causing the problems. What would you say to people who have that opinion or who think that freedom movements and resistance movements are the problem?
Well, first of all, I think it's Article 224 of the Geneva Convention. The person that's been oppressed in their own country by outsiders can actually resist with weapons. Um, Now, you said about the Hamas being designated as a T group. They're freedom fighters at the end of the day. They're
Mm.
they're basically living in a concentration camp, which is controlled by land, sea, and air. They're not allowed to have building materials. They're not allowed to have coke. They're not allowed to have chocolate and a load of other things. Now,
Mm-hmm.
there was also accusations of 40 beheaded babies that came out, which was all automatically debunked by the Israelis. The president of the United States, Joe Biden, said it himself that it
Hmm.
happened. He said he saw pictures, but there was nothing.
Yeah, true.
But what would these countries actually look like without foreign interference? Why are
Yeah,
these resistance groups formed when you look at the likes of Hezbollah, why they were formed, when you look at the likes of Hamas
yeah,
that was and there's more resistance groups in Gaza. The IRA was formed through by the oppression. Like in the 80s, one of the biggest enrolling things for the IRA was actually Bloody Sunday,
mm,
where people just went down and signed up that night there and then to join the resistance.
yeah,
Like if people weren't being colonized, all of this stuff would go away. And
yeah,
how this is all formed is 90% foreign interference.
absolutely. And that's 100% true. I think, one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter, and freedom fighting can never be um, can never be sort of put in a way that it's making it a bad thing. Of course, we all want our freedom. Why wouldn't we? And therefore, to fight for your freedom, it seems like not just a human right, but it seems like an instinct that we would all have. But I think it's interesting that, labels such a terrorist, which doesn't really do well to explain what's going on. All that it's doing is maligning the people without the actual context of why people, are resisting, why there's an uprising. Because, we have words like self defense. When we think of self defense, we think of defending ourselves from perpetrators. And when there's an uprising, like you mentioned in Ireland, and when there's a resistance movement, that is a form of self defense. So I think words matter. And, with the resistance, certainly, whether you're looking in Palestine, Kashmir, or other places, definitely in Kashmir, the resistance movements have been denoted as Islamic extremists, and that they are what's terrorizing the Kashmiri people, which is obviously nonsense. And I think that in those terms, that when you use words like terrorists, you're basically trying to hide the true nature of what is going on. Because we could argue that the British were terrorists in Ireland, actually. We could argue that the Israelis have been terrorizing the Palestinians. We could argue that India has indeed, and its soldiers, through the actions of its soldiers since the late 80s, has been terrorizing the people there. We're talking about things like forced disappearance that goes into the thousands. We're talking about tear gas to control crowds, pellet guns that have blinded, almost like 1,000 people, men, women, and children, mass rapes that have gone on, people being abducted, tortured, generally killings that have gone into hundreds of thousands. And now we see active ethnic cleansing and an attempt by India to displace the indigenous population of the valley, which obviously is its way of sort of crowbarring in its own demographic into the region, flood them in, to oust the indigenous people so that they have that more firm control. And I think we can sort of conclude here a little bit, but just quickly before we do that, we know we have a lot of, whether it's people from Britain that went to settle in Northern Ireland, and they are some of the people that want to remain part of the UK. But do you feel that that attempt to get people from mainland UK into Northern Ireland was an attempt by Britain to get a foothold in Ireland as well?
Yeah, it's like Britain doesn't want to lose it at the end of the day, but long term they will. It's going to fall at some stage. Less and less people. Sorry, less and less people are actually supporting the loyalists above in the north. The politically, you know, um, I give it another 5 to 10 years to be quite
Hmm.
honest.
Yeah,
But
sounds amazing.
hopefully, hopefully.
No, that sounds amazing. And I think to end with then, what's your message to people who say that, there's no point with things like activism, protesting, resistance. There's just no point in doing it in the first place. What can we say to people about the resistance around the world in different areas, whether we're talking about Hamas, whether we're talking about the resistance in Kashmir or any form of resistance against oppression, and for people to kind of, when they feel like tired almost, like even those people that are in the currently, for example, in the pro-Palestinian movement, where we see all the things that have gone on, and sometimes you can feel a bit tired, as if there's no point, nothing will change. What can, with your background and with Ireland's background and successfully having had pushed the British back, what can you say to people? A, who say there's no point in activism, protesting, etc., and B, to give hope to carry on. What can you say about that to end with?
Well, to be quite honest, I got burnt out many a times. The best thing is take a break and come back a week later or something like that. Find another thing to occupy your mind as well. Now, for the advocating for Palestine or any country, I've been doing it 4 years. I've seen a lot of what goes on there. But when October the 7th happened, where would the Gazans people be without all the people that have been activisms for them? They basically had a crowd that was supporting them and like debunking any lies that was coming out by Israel at the time. Now, Kashmir, Sudan, the Congo doesn't really have that. And we should be speaking up a lot more for any cause. We should not be standing with the oppressors. We should be standing with the oppressed at the end of the day. And hopefully someday soon Kashmir will be free, Sudan will be free, Congo will be free, Palestine will be free, and all any other place too.
Inshallah, brother. And that's a perfect note to end on. And thank you so much for those wise words today and letting us know about Ireland's history, which I think, I can honestly say I've learned something today, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners will have as well. Thank you for your inspiration. Yes, Ireland has come through it. It might have more ways to go, but it's come so far from where it was, and it gives the rest of us hope. And yeah, just thank you for joining us. Any last words from you?
No worries. Thanks for having me. And free Kashmir and free Palestine, free the Congo and free Sudan and free the oppressed.
Absolutely. Absolutely. 100% solidarity. And that's the end of our podcast today. Thanks to Irish Warrior for joining us and making it another exciting and interesting episode. And we'll catch you next time, where we might be debunking the myths around Hindutva and its ideology around why Kashmir belongs to India. So look forward to that session where we'll be picking apart some of the false narrative. Until then, until next time, goodbye.
Bye bye.